Happy holidays from the Behind the Bells podcast.
Marker. And action.
This is Behind the Bells, the show that takes you behind the magic of your favorite Christmas movies and shows. Within the background of every Santa Claus, reindeer, and stocking is a story. Where did it come from? Our Christmas movie expert will unravel all of that and give you the full story. Sit back and enjoy another episode with Robert Nicholas.
Merry Monday, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Bells. I'm your host, Robert Nicholas, and I'll be taking you on another one-horse open sleigh ride into the world of Christmas movies. Today, we continue our exploration of the Richard Donner movie Scrooged. Now, before we begin, I should clarify an error that I made in the last episode. I had previously said that Scrooge was Richard Donner's first comedy. It turns out that I'd forgotten he had made a comedy in 1982, The Toy, starring Richard Pryor and Jackie Gleason. A remake of a French film, Le Chouet. The premise revolved around a journalist, Richard Pryor's character, who ends up being quote-unquote bought by Jackie Gleason's character, a billionaire who made the purchase for his son. For the next 2 weeks, Pryor now had to be that live-in friend for the kid. As racist as that sounds, to the movie's credit, is well aware of that, and by making Pryor's character a journalist, he tries to expose some of the underlying racism going on in Baton Rouge, even stopping an attempt from the KKK Grand Wizard from getting a picture with a prominent senator for future blackmail. Now, the big problem is that The Toy is not as smart as it wanted to be. The movie is more boring than anything, with a depressed Richard Pryor and a stoned-out Jackie Gleason looking miserable, trying to get through it, and stuck with a very formulaic plot. Much of it was due to a very troubled production in which Richard Donner had little control over the script, the actors, and even the final cut. He doesn't seem to count it as his own, and thus, I don't count it as his first genuine comedy. Scrooged was definitely his comedy, though we'll get to that when we do. With that said, keep your hands and arms inside the vehicle at all times. Let's go. Let's continue where we left off, with Bill Murray ready to make his first movie in 4 years and hoping that Scrooged will be his comeback. If you haven't listened to the first part yet, I recommend doing so before listening. But here's a brief recap. Scrooge was created in a time in which it couldn't have been before. It's the first major movie version of A Christmas Carol set in modern day. I didn't see the movie until high school, and I loved it. The movie was the result of an eccentric comedian and a rock journalist, Michael O'Donoghue, and Mitch Glazer. Both were on the set of Saturday Night Live when they met. They both agreed that a modern update of A Christmas Carol around the television world would be funny. Bill Murray was their only choice, though he declined. After the failure of Razor's Edge and a 4-year sabbatical, Bill Murray agreed to do it and helped rewrite the screenplay. Richard Donner was in demand at the time and was Paramount greenlit the project and set up a $6 million salary. Scrooge was about to push what kind of a story A Christmas Carol was capable of. Something that was much more offbeat and dark, but more importantly, comedic and heartwarming. This is a mile from the sketches from SNL, which only needed to be funny. Scrooge was also going to show whether or not Bill Murray could. I've mentioned that he'd been a part of ensemble movies like Meatballs and Caddyshack, and as a part of a team in Stripes and Ghostbusters, but he had to carry this movie all on his own. He had to go through a redemption ghost story while ensuring his Ebenezer Scrooge character was sympathetic enough to see the end. He also had to prove that his brand of comedy wasn't just a passing fad. With a lot of people seeing this as quote-unquote their moment, how would it come together? Would there be fights, redemptions, regrets? Let's take a look. This is part 2 of the Scrooge story. The first part of shooting was on site in New York City beginning on December 7th, 1987, wanting to take advantage of the city already decked out for the holidays. The on-site locations included Rockefeller Center, Saks Fifth Avenue, and the Seagram's building, which would serve as the exterior for the IBC network where Bill's character Frank was president at. It was clear from the get-go that leaving the movies for 4 years has not made him less famous. As soon as Bill Murray appeared in view of the public, he was recognized immediately. According to associate producer Jenny Lou Tungud, shooting outside in New York at Christmas was hysterical. Everybody loved Bill. Cars would honk. People would be like, "Hey, Bill!" We had lots of fun. While the public may have loved him, his personality was getting in the way of a lot of people. In fact, the director of photography, Conrad Hall, who had previously worked on Cool Hand Luke, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and The Marathon Man, quit only after 1 week of production. His complaint was that the pace of the shoot was going too slow, with simple shots taking nearly 2.5 hours to set up, to which he blamed on Bill Murray wanting to improvise. Though according to Donner, he told his DP, "This isn't gonna work. You lack a sense of humor." All Hall said before leaving was, "You're right." Donner quickly replaced him with Michael Chapman, the acclaimed photographer of Jaws, Taxi Driver, and Raging Bull. He was more up to par with shooting Bill Murray. But somebody should have also asked the writers on what they thought. O'Donoghue was clearly unhappy that his already changed script was being changed over and over on the spot. Several gags that he thought would play to Murray's strength were being thrown out in favor of whatever Bill wanted. O'Donoghue's temper would only grow from each passing day to the next. He tried to get Donner to convince Murray to stick to the script, but he clearly didn't see it as the writer's movie. Donner was busy enough trying to quote-unquote direct. According to Ginny Lou, when Dick decides to come on board, it becomes Dick's movie. But Scrooge became Dick and Bill's movie. It was a time in which Bill Murray's career needed a hit, so I personally think there was a lot of pressure. She's not wrong. In fact, when I did my research for Scrooge, I thought I was going to come out hating Murray's attitude. Instead, I have a lot of empathy. It's best to see it in his shoes. This is a man who took a break after his first failure, was working on his first solo comedy, and knew that if it didn't work, he would have received the majority of the blame. He wanted to ensure that Scrooged would come out as perfect as it could have. It just so happened that everyone else couldn't see where the line was drawn between being self-interested and being selfish. It was also clear that Donner was not used to Murray's style of improv. So much was shot and tried that Donner started to debate whether he was hired not to direct Murray so much as restrain him. According to him, directing Bill is like being a cop at Times Square with all the lights gone out. The challenge was in creating a character whose humor you enjoy even when you're angry with him, someone you really care about by the end of the film. Donner still had an understanding of how A Christmas Carol needed to be told, and seemed willing to work away. A fun little side note, given that they were still shooting in New York as Christmas approached, Donner asked the Paramount executives if the cast and crew could take the holiday off, to which he was told no. Donner worked around it by simply firing everyone at the end of the day on December 24th and then rehiring them on the 26th. He felt it was important for the entire production to see their family. End side note. After shooting scenes for Frank's childhood home in Queens and at the still open as of today Atlantic Grill, where Frank starts to have ghostly encounters, the production then moved to the Paramount lot in Los Angeles to shoot all the interiors. The production at this point was starting to get to everyone. Maybe it was because there were a lot of people that had their idea on what the movie should be. Or perhaps it was because with someone like Murray, you never knew what was going to happen. Either way, Donner was starting to feel the stress of making this work. Bill, on the other hand, was letting his anxiety get to him. He continued to try a variety of material, even if he was the only one who found it funny. His daily schedule wouldn't be to complete it without an argument with Donner. When asked if he had disagreements, Murray had told Roger Ebert,
Only a few. Every single minute of the day.
One such example was many of the darker moments of the story. One scene they heavily disagreed on that ironically also happened to be one of my favorite moments was a scene involving Frank showcasing his quote-unquote fear-mongering trailer for Scrooged that include acid rain, drug addiction, international terrorism, freeway killings, and even nuclear war. Donner didn't want something this stark, ironically, in a movie that relied on black humor, but it ended up being filmed the way Murray wanted. Another cast member who recalled a tense set was the Ghost of Christmas Present, Carol Kane. Her memory of working on it was mostly positive. Most of her praise went to Donner for creating a space that was open to most ideas. It was Murray that things got painful. Another running gag was that she was rough with Frank despite her manic pixie look. In order to capture a genuine reaction, Murray insisted on Kane making as much physical contact as possible. Though the line was drawn from a real toaster smacking him in the face, nothing was off the table. His hair was pulled, his cheek was slapped, his nose was tweaked, even his lip was torn. If you watch the movie, you can see some blood coming from Murray's gums when Kane pulls it like silly putty. According to Bill,
There's a piece of skin that connects your lip with your gums, and it was really pulled away.
this resulted in the production being shut down for a couple of days for his lips to heal. Because it was Murray's idea to take actual hits from her, this put a toll on Kane. She apparently broke down in tears several times from having to strike him. Production continued, with more jokes thrown in by Murray, but Donner kept trying to ensure his own personal touches. Some include a part in Frank's past where in the background of a television show called Frisbee, there is a message in a tree in which the movie shows up a close-up of. Dick loves Lauren. This is a reference to his wife, Lauren Donner. There's a scene where Frank's brother and family are playing a game in which no one can answer one question: what is the name of the boat on Gilligan's Island? Donner had directed several episodes of Gilligan's Island. Even John Glover's character, Bryce Cummings, was a nod to Donner's personal experience on Superman. Just like how Frank was assigned an additional executive to help, the stress that Richard Donner got resulted in another director, Richard Lester, being hired to mediate, only to replace Donner in Superman 2. Now, the next part proved to be pretty controversial, but we'll get to that in just a moment, after a short break.
And now back to the show with our Christmas movie expert, Robert Nicholas.
One scene that proved to be very controversial, at least for one of the writers, was the movie's ending. To be fair, the ending to A Christmas Carol is always going to be the hardest to get right. The final scene has to answer two questions in relation to Ebenezer Scrooge. First, did his change in heart feel genuine? And second, did he earn his redemption? Now, in the original story, Scrooge felt the warmth of the Christmas season and how he should keep Christmas in his heart every day. Thus, Bob Cratchit and his family were rewarded. In Scrooged, Frank stops the live production and addresses the home audience, chastising them for watching television instead of spending time with family while addressing his own friends and family, apologizing for his behavior before showcasing how much he's come to love people around him. This goes as far as getting Claire into the studio and having Frank introduce her to the world as they embrace. This also results in Frank's assistant's son, Calvin, to utter his first words in a long time, "God bless us, everyone." The scene in the movie ends with the cast singing, "Put a Little Love in Your Heart." When they shot the scene, O'Donoghue instructed Murray to stick to the script. But once the camera rolled, Murray did anything but follow orders. Donner saw that Bill was going to try something big, and he kept the camera rolling. The speech became manic, so much that when tears came out of Murray's eyes, many had thought he was in the middle of a nervous breakdown. By the time Murray had started to sing his own version of Deck the Halls, Donner had already given instruction for everyone to join him, bolstering the impact of the character's journey. It suddenly turned into a chorus of everyone singing "Put a Little Love in Your Heart." Even Donner got in on the action, holding child actor Nicholas Phillips on his shoulders as they all sang. The one shot ran for over 10 minutes until Donner finally yelled cut. The cast and crew cheered, proud of what they captured. All except for one, Michael O'Donoghue. He was apparently so shocked at what had just been done, he uttered, "What was that? The Jim Jones hour?" Donner, in response, socked him in his arm, which left him bruised. The next day, the ending was reshot with a more scripted version of the improv, but the movie would feature the more spontaneous shot from the day before. I'd say that this was the point in which O'Donoghue no longer saw Scrooged as the movie he wrote. What started as a mostly dark comedy has now ended with something that he saw as phony, tripe, and even out of tone with the rest of the movie. And I'll admit, for a while, I disliked the ending. The cynical side of me had also thought that the ending came off as a little too sweet in conjunction with the rest of the more macabre story. But after viewing it again, and again, and again, I have to side with Murray. After seeing their whole lives and being led on a journey with three ghosts, who wouldn't go a little crazy? Who wouldn't be manic about ensuring that everyone should be as nice to everyone year-round and not just on Christmas? Finally, if today was your last day, wouldn't you want to plead your heart out on the importance of your worth and spirit? Production finished at around March of 1988. Now it was time to see if they could take the millions of ideas that they shot and put it into a comprehensive movie. The editing team was a father-son pair, Frederick and William Steinkamp. Donner was also present, as was Sidney Pollack, who I already talked about as the original choice for director. While he declined, he was an uncredited consultant. You'd think that once he was done shooting, Bill Murray would have finally taken a step back and gone home. That would also be a nope. Murray stuck around to also oversee the editing. It doesn't seem like either scriptwriter was around for the process. As far as I see, O'Donoghue saw his story as gone. That didn't make the editing much easier, because Bill Murray had improvised much of his dialogue. Most takes and shots were never the same. One scene might have him sticking to the script, while another would have made a joke about Richard Pryor. 9 times out of 10, the scene with the Pryor joke would go in. And such a scene did make it in, the one set at the Atlantic Grill. Murray was still paranoid that the movie could implode and end his career. Because of that, he argued consistently. He yelled at the editors, he yelled at the producers, he yelled at Sidney Pollack, and of course, not caring about the pressure he was under, Donner was also yelled at. Donner had always been used to getting his way. The last thing he wanted was another experience like on Superman and Superman 2, where the producers thought that they could do a better job than the man they hired. But Donner was anything but the master and commander. He grew more irritable as the process went. He eventually reached a breaking point when the ending was being worked on. Donner was determined to keep the spontaneous speech and song "Put a Little Love in Your Heart" as the ending. But Bill was starting to have second thoughts. Murray wanted a different ending. Donner simply responded, "I'm out of here. Jenny, you figure it out. Goodbye." No one, especially Bill Murray, stopped him. Donner flew to Florida, where he rented a boat and intended to sail through the Panama Canal and into the West Coast. This was intentional, as to limit his contact with anyone. The editors pleaded to get Donner back, but were told that he would only be available at certain times on radio when he was on land. To make things harder, Donner got caught in a hurricane, which reduced his availability to once a day. He was just done with Scrooged. Back in LA, Murray continued his shouting matches at everyone as fellow producer Art Linson tried his best to keep everyone calm. At least 20 minutes of comedic footage were cut. These scenes, from what I can gather, were primarily there to continue showcasing of how much of a jerk Frank was supposed to be. The editors wanted to ensure that the movie didn't stop to tell a joke, but rather had the jokes as a part of the flowing story. So at least when we see the solid gold dancers and homeless people confusing Frank for Richard Burton, they all have purpose. Strange purpose, but still purpose. As for the ending, as it was in his contract, Donner got the ending he wanted. When the film was test screened at Paramount, the buzz was already good. There was some concern that audiences would find the adaptation of A Christmas Carol too weird. The sneak peek screenings generated a 93% positive rating. The executives knew that Bill Murray was box office gold. They knew that people were liking it so far. To give the movie a safety net, much of the marketing, trailers, and posters made references to Ghostbusters, hoping that a mainstream crowd would see the film as a chance to recapture that experience. They were already going to get that with Ghostbusters 2 the next year, but it was clear that Paramount wanted to ride off the success of what worked before. The tagline of the poster read, "Bill Murray is back among the ghosts, only this time it's 3 against 1. If this didn't come off as forced, I don't know what would. With the way it's worded, it almost made it sound like that Murray was going to fight them or bust them. The movie opened at number 1 on November 23rd, 1988, in time for the Thanksgiving weekend. It managed to gross $13 million in its first week. It played fine over December despite facing competition from the Arnold Schwarzenegger, Danny DeVito comedy Twins. It grossed $60 million against a $32 million budget, making it a mild success. It may have not been a Ghostbusters level hit, but it was enough to give Bill Murray confidence that he could continue his career. The film might have been a bigger hit had critical reviews been better, but at the time, critics were not that kind to it. Roger Ebert said, "It is the most disappointing, unsettling film to come along in quite some time," to which he even highlighted that the movie was more mean-spirited than funny. Empire's William Thomas called it a cynical update of A Christmas Carol, and was only funny when Bill Murray was being a bastard. The Washington Post's Joe Brown called it a mess, but seemed to praise it a tad more. He also said it would unlikely become a holiday tradition, noting it would become too dated to be timeless. The Los Angeles Times critic Sheila Benson seemed to like the movie's satire on the television industry, noting Bill Murray's knowledge of golden age of television as his own memories, and the suggestion of television programming for pets, but was disappointed that the movie didn't expand on those themes. Critics were equally divided on Murray's performance as Frank. Some thought it was believable and heartwarming. The Hollywood Reporter called it hilariously convincing and impressively sinister. Others, like Roger Ebert, were not as impressed. Ebert said that Murray looked unhappy and wasn't as light or as punchy as his previous performances. Going back to the Los Angeles Times opinion, Benson felt that Frank was too sinister and too far from redemption. The biggest critic, however, was writer Michael O'Donoghue. He was angry that only 40% of the script made it into the final movie. In his own biography, he was quoted as saying, "We wrote a fucking masterpiece. We wrote It Happened One Night. We wrote a story that could make you laugh and cry. You would have wanted to share it with your grandchildren every fucking Christmas for the next 100 years. The finished film was a piece of unadulterated, unmitigated shit." He ended up disowning the movie, remaining angry with it until he died in 1994. Even Bill Murray has thrown shade at Scrooged. He's talked with Roger Ebert in an interview as saying,
"It could have been a really, really great movie. The script is so good. He,
Donner,
kept telling me to do things louder, louder, louder. I think he was deaf."
He's gone on to say that Scrooge was such a tough experience that he has trouble even talking about it. Before you get angry with him, you have to ask yourself if you'd be willing to go back to your most challenging period in life, like a breakup, or the worst year of your work. I most certainly would not. It would be interesting to see what he currently thinks of the movie today. Scrooged has gone on to become a cult hit, though it's not brought up a lot like how A Christmas Story and Home Alone are seen as Christmas classics. But I always seem to come across people who have seen the movie and see it as a classic. They love the darker elements. They love the references to the greed and exploitation of the Christmas season by a television network. They love the retelling of A Christmas Carol. But most of all, they love Bill Murray. Despite the critics initially saying he was too mean, people saw his character as redeemable. They saw him as someone that they didn't want to meet his demise. I agree with them. So why didn't critics give it more praise? Like I said, it was ahead of its time, especially in an era where quote-unquote weird Christmas movies were only starting to be made. We were a long way off from the future of Bad Santa, The Family Stone, Krampus, and even 2020's Fat Man. I think a lot of critics were more startled than offended. The movie comes off like a haunting ghost that only wanted to show how much Christmas spirit can come from unexpected places. Scrooged may be a product of the mid-'80s, but its tone feels a lot more modern. It's an odd combination of ideas that turned out something really good. Sure, it can be haunting, but it feels truthful and honest. it's something that did put a little love in my heart, and for many people.
Thank you for joining us on this sleigh ride into the magical world of Christmas movies. Check us out for weekly rides into your favorite Christmas classics and their histories. Be sure to give us a positive review on iTunes if you like what you heard. And don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram for updates and special news. Consider subscribing on Patreon in order to help keep the show going and to gain access to some special gifts not available to the public. Merry Monday to all, and to all a good night. See you next week.
Cut. Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.